One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio, another session, another week. James is here together with me hosting this session at One Step Ahead Radio. And of course, this week has been quite intensive, James. There is a lot of things happening within the UN. There's a huge, it's called the Climate Week as well in New York, in US. And there have been some really... I don't know how to call them anymore, statements from a president of the United States in a General Assembly about climate, about hoax, about science, stupid science, and many other things. I don't want to quote all of it because it's going to take a long time. But of course, we have a lot of other things happening in the world. The China news on President Xi talk on the climate, and of course some other stuff around the world. So James, how do you feel today?
Hi there, Sasha. Yes, feeling good. It's been a hell of a week.
Yes.
Lot of above all at high level, political level, a lot of talk, a lot of very contrasting views on where we're going and what the direction is. So it's an interesting week to kind of take stock of all of this and see whether we're going forward, backward, sideways, or just round and round in a spin drive.
Yeah.
No,
It is. It's a bit like that, but it's also about the. I mean, we touched upon that earlier. The narrative, sort of. What is the, how do you build the future expectations by using different narratives? And obviously, the U.S. and China are on a completely opposite sides on this. Although, as we have been hearing, the Chinese commitments related to climate targets, national goals, is not as progressive as it should be. But on the other hand, what's happening in the US, it's a bit more worrying, and maybe we should dwell into that. James, I mean, there is a clear sort of a line from the American government, current administration, to basically dismantle everything that has to do with climate science, but also with general sort of a perception that renewable energy is part of the solution going forward. So I'm a bit scared with this because it's so open. I don't know what you think about that.
And above all, that I think the venue of saying these things. I mean, we're kind of used to the Trump narrative on climate change. It's been, even from his first. In his first administration, it was a very clear line that he had. What we're seeing now is a much more systematic and a much more comprehensive approach to roll back to turn things to the way he sees on his agenda. I think what stunned a lot of people, even in the room, apparently, from what I read in the media, was that he said it in the UN. Choosing his two key targets to demonize immigrants and green energy, calling him a double-tailed monster that he said, for example, is destroying Europe. So
Yes.
with messages and narratives that play really well to his base, and like he's talking to a global audience and directly to global leaders. I think the first time he came out making all of these statements in a kind of UN setting, there was a lot of kind of smirking and he's kind of crazy and listen to this guy. And now it's kind of, there's a sort of silence in the room and people are going, oh, okay. It's a very different atmosphere in which it's being received, and the way he connects everything to the future, his the future vision of where the American administration and the Republican Party want the world to go, and how they're really, really forcing that agenda very, very concretely. So,
but it is,
he didn't mix his words really.
Not really, and he was, I think, as clear as he could be on the topic. But what is surprising to me is the fact that this will hurt American livelihoods and American jobs as well, which is a bit odd in a way how it's portrayed, because if you're really looking beyond the narrative that he's driving, there are a lot of positive things happening in the US on the renewable energy side, and that states like Texas are basically more or less running on renewables. So it's very interesting sort of how they are trying to shape the polarization going forward. It's actually almost like creating a conflict, while on the other hand, we have a China, and China has come out with a completely different view. What's your take on that, James?
Well, I was interested in seeing how it was overall received. President Xi Jinping, just to catch up, used his speech to the UN to pledge his country's economy-wide net greenhouse gas emissions to reduce to 7 to 10% below peak levels by 2035. And behind that, a whole raft of other 2035, 10-year targets in terms of the share of, for example, non-fossil fuels in China's energy mix to 30%, raising wind and solar capacity to 3,600 gigawatts, make new energy vehicles the mainstream, increasing forest stock. There's a whole series of other targets, and I think a lot of the mainstream media focused on that as a huge counterpoint to Trump's statements 2 days earlier, I think it was, or one day, anyway,
yes,
immediately afterwards, and saying, here is an American administration doing everything to step back, and the counterpoint of the Chinese government doing everything to step up,
yes,
and to become very clear. I noticed a lot of the more focused media that is looking more detail of it, pointing out how it's actually what he's been saying is quite conservative.
Yeah.
And if you look at the emissions profile of the major countries, a lot of them in Europe, who have managed already to reduce their emissions from peak, there was an interesting study that was done looking, I think it was at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, showing that other countries after the peak managed to decrease their emissions much faster than the Chinese pledge. So everyone's, or in that area, there's a sort of suspicion that he's pledged something that's actually quite easy to achieve, and that there's almost criticism that the Chinese should have been even bolder than that. But obviously,
which is very interesting, because of course we can criticize them, and it's very interesting that socialist or whatever, communist, capitalist dictatorship is the last sort of a resort of hope, because they are also one of the biggest emitter on the planet, due to the fact that
they are the biggest. That's right.
Yeah, we are reallocated. We have reallocated our industries to China, and that's sort of how it is. But what surprised me the most is the fact that there is so little criticism on, in general, on what Trump has said about climate change in the General Assembly in the UN. You don't see the statements from the world leaders. You don't see the pushback. You don't see the clear messaging from the business communities and so on. Of course, the Chinese problem is that they haven't decided what's the baseline year they're gonna measure from. So
no, that's...
it's for me, it's a bit of a like, okay, so it's sort of if you don't have a baseline year, then you can sort of push the numbers around, which they certainly will do, and they're still investing a lot in coal, but it is a strange sort of a development we see, where we, put our hopes and sort of a rescue towards the country that is also very specific in a way how they not treat only climate, but also other things related to their, politics and everything else. So it is indeed a strange world. And what is also very strange is the fact that Trump administration is pushing World Bank, among others, James, to increase investments to fossil fuels. And it has been nearly 2 years since a hard-fought agreement at COP28 in Dubai, basically to pursue a global transition away from fossil fuels. And a new study that has been released by Stockholm Environment Institute analyzed official projections of medium and long-term output from 20 major producers of coal, oil, and gas, which between them account for more than 80% of the world fossil fuel production. Now, government projections from these 20 major producers of all fossil fuel rising strongly between now and 2030, and production of oil and gas growing right through 2050. This is a huge contrast with the dramatic and immediate production cuts that we'll need in order to meet Paris Agreement. So something is utterly wrong, James. And the question is, sort of this schizophrenic reality we live in. On the one hand, you have the World Bank, which has several years ago decided to shift away from further financing fossil fuels. And now we have the study basically pointing out that we're going to continue expanding the fossil fuel use across the world, although we know it's not really aligned. So the question is, what are politicians doing? And I don't have the answer. I have just a lot of questions. But my take on it is that politicians have completely lost it. And I don't know, what the UN can do or anybody else, but obviously the businesses should step forward. And this is, at least from my angle, something that needs to happen and needs to happen very quickly. What's your take on it, James? Where are you on this one? Because, it's strange. I think it is very strange because, we have also the legal obligations of the certain obligations from these countries. So I don't know exactly where it's going to lead.
I think what we're seeing this week is kind of the battle of narratives, and trying to play out in broader consensus around these issues. And it's really a fracturing. We talked about at this beginning of the year, like the fracturing of the global consensus that we had maybe 10 years. It's 10 years since the Paris Climate Agreement, when the people like you and I, and we've been following these issues, sort of finally felt that there was a global agreement around where we need to go and what the end point is, right? And that has slowly been unpicked as various countries see, their own interests within that overall picture, and that's come to a head with the approach of the Trump administration. And so it's kind of a setting of battle lines around where the future lies, what is in the interest of elected and unelected governments. And it kind of connected, what you just said there was connected to some comments I read, again, going back to the UN, but the UNFCCC, the climate change committee of the UN, their executive director Simon Steele gave a speech this week in which this phrase that came out about trying to be very positive. The new era of climate action must be about bringing our process closer to the real economy, and it says we need to connect cabinet rooms to the boardrooms to the living rooms if we want to supercharge climate action. I mean, it's a nice soundbite.
Yeah,
but
it is.
Gets at the heart of what you're saying about the connecting between the political level and the business level, but also the consumer and the voter and the man in the street, as it's called. Because he says, if we look past the noise, the facts show a world aligning with the Paris Agreement. So he's really trying to push back and contrast with sort of the future. Sort of we're way out of line. Touching on investment in renewables and the increase in the last few years, the clean energy transition across so many major economies, hitting $2 trillion last year. So he's really trying to paint that positive picture. And above his head, there's these sort of narratives going on and painting and saying that, everything's kind of going to come to a head. COP30 is going to be a huge venue where these contrasting narratives are really going to come together and we're gonna see this huge clash of different views and different agendas and different interests really coming together. So
Yeah, I got
I
that
thought that
feeling
was kind of a
too.
good summary of
Yeah,
where we are.
I got that feeling too that we are very close to see the COP30 in Brazil as the sort of an open conflict stage where in the South, the global South, will probably drive the agenda that is completely different from what the global North or global West is thinking it's important going forward. And I think many of these countries with the populace that is so huge will have at least many things to bring to the table for discussion going forward. James, what is also sort of annoying a bit is the fact that we had just recently on the 21st of September, we had a global peace day. And, I was looking across the mainstream media outlets, reportings and all of that. It hasn't been sort of acknowledged in that way that you should expect, given the times we live in, but it hasn't got that much attention at all. And what is more important than ever is this conversation about de-escalation and peace. But we don't see that a lot anywhere right now, which is, of course, very sad, but also very dangerous because we are in this spin of militarization of our economies and militarization of our narratives, which is moving the boundaries of what is, acceptable from moral point of view, but also from sort of a ground level dignity point of view. It's a bit strange because I'm thinking also about all of these, sustainability reports and all of the companies that are doing this. I mean, they should be, to my understanding, a bit worried about the fact that we are militarizing everything because it's not really good for business going forward. To some, it will be, but not for all. So I don't know. I mean, is this conversation about peace? Is that sort of a council right now, James? Is that your view too?
I think so many big companies have had their, fingers burnt by taking positions that then become unsustainable or difficult over the time. And really, there's a trend away from taking a stance on these kind of broad social, political, geopolitical issues. There was a time a few years ago when brands had to take a stand, and we wanted
Yeah.
to know where you position, and so many companies find that above all, internally, this fracturing that we mentioned
Mm,
before is also within their own workforce.
mm,
So I think a lot of companies think more than twice. They think very carefully about, standing up, um, and assuming that as a company they can speak with one voice when in the outside world, there is no one voice. There is no easy, simple. It's sort of when you do that, sort of a simple
yeah.
messaging and position that everyone can more or less align around, and there aren't those sort of easy certainties. I mean, I speak all the time with companies that have global workforces or international workforces and say, well, what we can say in Europe isn't the same as what we can say in the US,
Mm,
and not from a political point of view, from like political actors, but just internally with their own
mm,
employees. So I think a lot of companies sort of tend to are shying away from that at the moment because they can't manage uh, the diversity of opinions that are really coming out in sometimes very forthright manner. People are
yeah,
really
but
kind of,
yeah. I don't know. It makes me a bit sad, but on the other hand, this is a forecast from my side, and I'm being in this business for so many years. I think that the companies in a couple of years, not really now, but in a couple, let's say in 5 years, will actually have the sections in their sustainability integrated reports, if these reports actually survive, which is a big question. I hope they will, about how they support democracy, because it is going to be a big question going forward. The world is shifting very quickly, and we are accepting things that we would never accept a couple of years ago, even maybe 2 years ago. But we're accepting him now, and I think the businesses will need to step forward. And this is a forecast from my side. I hope I'm wrong that they will not need to do this, but I think it's going to be necessary for them to actually take a stance for that going forward. That's at least from my side. James, I know you have been looking at
Okay,
some
well,
other
it's
things around the world,
interesting.
as well. Yes. Anything else that
Yeah,
you've
I just
seen?
wanted to mention another thing I think was very important this week was another delay to the European Union anti-deforestation law
Yeah.
or directive that came out this week. So it's been widely discussed regulation. Been many years in the making, but it's had a lot of pushback. For
Mm.
example, from trade partners such as Brazil, Indonesia, and the US, who say, that complying with these rules would be costly and hurting their exports. Um, Officially, the EU has blamed it on an IT problem, an IT
That's
system, so this
wonderful. That's
platform.
wonderful. Yes, it's wonderful.
Um, Saying that it would slow down if they put it online, then it's not up to the
Mm.
job at the moment, so they want to launch it when it's actually sufficiently good. The WWF put out a statement with the headline, "The dog ate my homework. Commission loses face over EUDR IT mess up," saying like,
Wow.
that's the worst excuse you could have. Like, if you say that it was because of an IT mess up, it's like, it means you haven't been able to do your homework, and
No.
and they can't actually get something operational done. So they were saying that was a real egg on the face moment
Yes.
for the EU, and it's kind of depressing again. 4 years on from COP26, when 140 companies pledged to end deforestation by 2030,
Yes.
that destruction continues. And we continue to wait to understand what a bloc like the European Union can do with consumers who don't want deforestation in their products and their economies. Deforestation is almost 50% higher than that
Yes.
pathway to eliminate to eliminate it by 2030, according to the latest Forest Declaration assessment. So that's kind of, again, question marks about the business lobbying against it, the trade negotiations that EU did a trade deal with Indonesia at the same time that this came out. Draw the
Yeah.
dotted lines.
You can put a
that,
puzzle
connect
together.
all
Yeah.
these things together.
Yeah. You can put a puzzle together. I mean,
Yeah.
can you imagine, James? This is so interesting because we are talking about so many different dimensions of this during these sessions. And I keep thinking about, for average Joe and Jolina living in Europe or anywhere else in the world, how complex it is to actually understand what really is happening. And there is so little information given to the public about all these sort of behind the scenes and also the big systemic changes that are happening. So the question is, how can we make this information more available to people that are actually out there, maybe leading and wanting to understand a bit more? I don't know. I've been thinking more and more about this for the last 6 months, how to make the information about this more available to the masses, to people actually not working with us on a daily basis. And that's maybe something we can discuss some other time, but that's just a take from my side, giving how these things are so many different dimensions, so many different details about what's really going on.
Which is kind of what I read through in the Simon Steele comment about the noise, and he says things underneath are actually moving in a very messy way towards the direction that we want, but it's the noise. And I think there's so many actors, not just political, but also in the media and in business, with interest to push an anti-climate agenda, anti-net zero, anti-ESG, anti-sustainability, that message is really getting pushed into people's minds at the moment. And so maybe just as we're in a position economically, technologically, to turn, a major corner, a lot of people are turning away from it because that's what they hear. The leader of the so-called free world standing up in front of everybody, giving that kind of a speech, and they say, okay, right, well, maybe he's right. Maybe it's just a hook and a con. And,
yes.
What I worry a lot about, not the people who are convinced what for or against. I worry about the people who are uncertain in the middle and don't know and don't have all the facts, and you can't expect them to have that kind of level of knowledge, and they sort of hear all this noise and, what are they making out? So, well, maybe they're right.
Maybe they're right. Yeah, no, if you're not convinced, you're right. Maybe that's something that we can
skeptics, just by just by lack of knowledge and lack of information.
Let's hope that we can reach some of these people, and that the other people working with this can reach them to make understanding about what's really happening a bit more clear, and then they can make their own judgment on that. James, thank you very much for this week. Very interesting week, and of course there are a lot of things coming up, I think, next week that we will cover. In the meantime, many thanks, and I wish you all a great weekend, and we'll get back next week.
Thanks to you, Sasha. Yeah, good debate and discuss a bit of the ramifications of this wild week, and have a good weekend, everyone. Happy to hear your thoughts if you want to get in touch with us and let you know what you think. Otherwise, happy listening, happy weekend, and be back soon.
Thank you, James. Talk next week. Bye.
To this whole geopolitical chess game that's being played at the moment, and as you were saying right at the beginning, in terms of the American officials putting pressure on Europe, for example, to water down their climate ambitions, it all plays in. You can't just think of one jurisdiction as a closed entity. They're all subject to this kind of constant recalibration of the global economic system since the Trump administration came into power.
Yeah. And this is something, I think, from political angle, it will be so interesting to touch upon some of these things, and also have a look in what is politically on a positive side, what is actually being done on a political side. And I'll do some digging on that during next week, and then maybe we can discuss that and elaborate more and see if we can share that insight with the audience that we have on Step Ahead Radio, Jim.
Super. Look forward to it. Try and stay positive.
Yeah, well, try to stay positive, heads up, and then we'll see, where the world goes next week. Thank you very much for your time and insight this week, and for everybody listening to One Step Ahead Radio, thank you, and please join us again next week.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.